Oh, hey, this week we welcome Davi Ottenheimer, product strategist at MongoDB. In our second feature interview, we welcome Chris Spain, counselor at Mandiant's Red Team. In the security news for this week, the evolution of the penetration test, the SIM hijackers, thousands of mega logins are dumped, Facebook refuses to remove fake news, the Russians allegedly hacked the DNC and mined Bitcoin, go figure, and a very inappropriate thing that happened in a kid's video game. All that and more on to this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Welcome. Did Larry have an introduction? Hi, everyone. This is Paul Asadorian. I guess I'm introducing...
Apparently, I no longer do. Wow, and I look short.
So, I accidentally landed in New England and stumbled my way to the G-Unit studio.
That's pretty much how I envisioned it happening, Jeff. Carlos, save the show, please.
Yes, somebody's got to do it.
You cannot be saved.
Well, it's good to have you back, Carlos. Jeff, welcome. Nice to have you in studio.
It's great to be here, Paul. Try to stay awake for the whole episode.
Yes. We've been in studio dropping his phone incessantly. Welcome, Chad.
What? Where? Oh, hey! I'm in the studio with you guys. That's kind of cool.
The average time between being hacked and realizing you've been hacked is 1 year. Can you afford to let an intruder roam your network for that long? Can your company weather the fallout when this comes to light? Black Hills Information Security can find the bad guys in your network and train you to do it yourself. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a hunt teaming engagement can help you find a persistent threat in your network. NetSparker, the developers of desktop and cloud-based web application security scanners that enable you to automatically identify vulnerabilities in your web applications and web services. NetSparker scanners employ a unique and dead-accurate vulnerability scanning engine that automatically verifies vulnerabilities with their proof of concept. For more information, visit them on the web at netsparker.com or email at contact@netsparker.com.
I can't see the screen. I'm facing this way, and the screen's over there. If Burgundy can't read the monitor. Slicker than a black plastic trash bag full of lube and rabid weasels. It's Paul.
That was literally, Doug maybe had 10 seconds to prepare that. And you just never cease to amaze me,
It's a mess in here.
I believe, you don't have to tell me, Doug. I'm fully aware
I was thinking about it before I even said that. So I was like driving over here going,
yeah, what if you got a trash bag?
Shake it up a little.
Oh, my God.
Dump in a bottle of Perrier. It's called a drink.
Oh, my.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. This is, in fact, episode 568. It is July 19th, 2018. We're in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. And I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian. In studio, sitting across from me, is Mr. Doug White, Dr. Doug White.
Yeah.
A professor.
I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV.
You play one in my university.
Yeah. I keep telling them that, and they keep listening.
And you are the director of cybersecurity programs for Roger Williams
I am. I'm the director of, something like that.
I had one of my neighbors actually asked me if I would recommend some colleges that she could attend to learn about cybersecurity and do a degree program. So I'm going to send her. No, I'm not going to send her your way.
Is she cute?
I'm going to definitely send them to another school. To my left, Mr. Patrick Laverty is here with us.
It's awesome to be here. And just like how you have not Kevin, can I be like not professor?
No.
Oh, okay.
Not Kevin is reserved for Kevin. There's a
not doctor.
A long.
Can I be not doctor?
You can be not doctor. Sure.
Okay, I want to be not doctor.
Dr. Patrick Laverty is here with us, and you are a senior penetration tester?
No, I'm not senior. I'm just regular.
Just regular.
Consultant, I think.
He prefers regular penetration.
That's right.
Regular senior penetration.
Yeah, it has nothing to do.
You take your Metamucil every morning, so therefore you're regular.
We try to stay about
penetration
as regular as we can. Yeah,
that's great. Fiber helps.
Oh yeah.
On the lines via Skype, Mr. Jason Wood is here with us. Jason, welcome. Jason's from Paladin Security, although I really love the time that I said Jason Paladin from Wood Security, but no, it's Jason Wood from Paladin Security. Jason, welcome.
Hey, everybody. Good to be here. And Yeah, every so often I get emails from you guys to Jason Paladin.
Yes. Funny how that works. Once it's been said on the internet, it's tough to take it back. Mr. Jack Daniel is here with us. What's going on, Jack?
Hello. Good
With
to
a
be back with
tapestry.
you. Yeah.
Jack, your name comes up a lot around here in the studio. Well, mostly good, I suppose.
Well, Facebook status updates and other things I know provide you with the entertainment.
I said all those jokes to myself. I respect you, Jack, on Facebook. Anyhow.
Yeah, on Facebook.
Oh boy. Before we get into it, please go fill out our 2018 listener survey by going to securityweekly.com/survey. It helps us understand our listeners so we can provide the best programming for you. Also partner with the best companies that we feel meet your needs. So please go fill out that survey. It is tremendously useful for us to continue to distribute all of our podcasts and media for free on the internet. So by taking that quick 5-10 minute survey, it ensures that we'll be around for a really long time.
I'm doing
Of course,
it right
if you
now.
don't want that, don't fill out the survey then. That's okay.
I'm going to fill it out right now.
Thank you, Patrick. So let me introduce our first guest, Davi Ottenheimer. He is the president of Flying Penguin, has more than 20 years of experience managing global security operations. He currently works today for MongoDB. Davi, welcome to the program.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Davi, thank you for joining us this evening. How did you get your start in information security?
Ooh. Well, I think it was just a natural fit because I was doing sort of security-related stuff before the industry really existed. So in the, I guess you could say the early 90s, late 80s, I was just really curious about how security fit in terms of everything, the entire world. And when computers just came in front of me, it went that direction naturally. So by 94, 95, I was tackling whatever security problem I could find within the IT context. That's
awesome. And then you were heavily involved in various roles in basically cloud and virtualization. Tell us a little bit about your experiences there.
Okay, I think that, being naturally curious and being involved in security from the start, even way back into when I was a kid, led me right into virtualization when I was working at some big financial processing company. There was an opportunity, we had an 8-way server, I remember very vividly. We were given unlimited access to this 8-way server, and they were like, what can you do with it? And back then, this would have been 97, I think, or 98, and they said, what are you going to do with 8 CPUs to test it? So I grabbed VMware. It must have been 99, I guess, when VMware was beta. And I started trying to see how many virtual machines I could launch and then push over X Windows to remote clients. So just for perspective, I could install Red Hat then, again, this is 1999, in about 30 seconds on the system. Operating system, everything. Fiber drives, it was just an amazing system. Today we talk about cores and stuff, but this is actually physically 8 CPUs. And so then I tried to start pushing virtual machines, and I got to about 6, and the system fell over. 7. So that was really my start, I guess, in sort of building my own cloud without really realizing it. And so from 99 to about 2009, I was working with virtualization and cloud just wherever I could. And then VMware kind of came to me and said, we want you to work on some stuff for us, which turned into vCloud. And so by 2012, after being on the inside of VMware and working on the creation of their cloud offering, I published a book about cloud security based on some of the work we did there. And then I was working at EMC, where I was basically going around the world building clouds as quickly as we could. We were launching up to 40,000 systems within 24 hours. So that was pretty exciting. It's kind of the trajectory of my cloud career, I guess. And now I'm working on the data that sits on top of it, so that's even more exciting.
Yeah, so if it's more exciting, we want to hear about that. So you made the transition basically from the cloud world into the MongoDB, although I'm sure there's a lot of still overlap there, right? But what prompted your decision to decide to go work for MongoDB?
Well, there are a couple things. I mean, one, they came to me and they said they were looking for people, and I was happy to help. I'm always trying to make connections between need, pain, and experts. And as I went around and I asked people like, who wants to help with these big data problems, people kept pointing back to me and saying, I thought you were the guy that was supposed to be fixing these things. And that felt weird. So I just thought, well, maybe I should do it. And then as I started to look at the problem, it made perfect sense. I mean, I was working on a book after my first book about cloud security. I was working on a book about big data security. And boy, it's just transformed, as I've been writing it into deeper and deeper topic. I've spent almost 5 years or 6 years now on it. And so MongoDB seemed like a great place to really explore all the aspects I could of the big data problem set. I really worked on Hadoop. I'd focused on that initially because that's what we were throwing on top of our biggest cloud platforms to do, like massive parallel processing. But MongoDB gave an opportunity to do something that was even more interesting, which is go directly into the developer community, which I have not done a lot of. So now I'm touching all different forms of development practices that go towards very large data sets. So that's just super exciting, and I decided to join to help out with that.
And you're very vocal about issues related to privacy and big data, correct?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. I'm not on Facebook, per the earlier discussion. Mm-hmm. And I think I've been very vocal about how disappointed I think our industry should be with the way that Facebook has handled their security. I mean, I've been a vocal critic, and I continue to be, about the accountability of security officers and security professionals who are sitting on top of what I consider integrity breaches and not doing anything about it, and then trying to claim afterwards that they tried and people should have listened to them. I feel like it's just a big black eye on our industry right now. And since 2014, as I was researching the book and working on this topic, I was a critic of Uber, of Facebook, of Tesla, and very specific examples I was trying to give people of how, if we don't, as an industry, as security professionals, having over 20 years in this, it just seems so obvious to me, if we don't take a firm position on how to secure these types of products, platforms, companies, then we're ceding control. We need to be much more, I think, proactive about what we would expect from a secure product. Facebook, to me, has some pretty obvious changes they could have made in 2014, and they went the opposite route, I believe, and that's where they ended up in this terrible place. Tesla killed a couple people they could have avoided.
Certainly, and I definitely want to talk about that. But so when I talk with people about privacy issues as it relates to some of the bigger properties you're talking about, such as Facebook, I think a lot of folks kind of like gloss over the fact that, well, if they want to target some advertisements to me, like what harm is that? And the shining example, and since you brought up Facebook, we'll use that as an example, right? When I go on Amazon and I'm browsing for stuff, when I come back to Facebook, I'm being targeted with ads for those specific products. And I think most people find that a little creepy, but they're not sounding the alarms. Well, why is that? And what are some of the concerns with even just that level of, that essentially using big data to make those connections?
Well, it's an interesting topic for us because it blends into the social sciences and even to psychology, anthropology, and so it becomes sort of a discomfort for people who are used to dealing with mathematics or computers specifically, where you can say, here are the rules. It's like gravity. We sort of establish what things should do, and then we decide whether they have done them appropriately or not, and that becomes much more murky when we get into sort of human behavior science. So I mean, for example, malware is going to affect or modify code, and then the machine is going to run differently than was expected. When you take that to the extreme, out to artificial intelligence or machine learning, you can influence the outcome in ways that are detrimental. And so you have to have controls in place on the path of making those decisions so that you don't get into a position where you're doing the wrong thing. That's essentially what we're talking about. Is it's a much more complex space, but it's the same thing. So on a binary level, you're basically making a bad choice. On a much more complex gray level, you have, I wouldn't say perfect knowledge, but you have this idea of what's going to happen, and you choose anyway to go down that route. And so why did you make that choice? And that takes us into philosophy, ethics of making poor decisions. So being bombarded by ads that change your decision and force you to go down a route that you wouldn't normally go to is in essence linked to malware. It's linked to the idea that you're affecting people's ability to do things, process things in a way that they should without interference, unauthorized interference for that matter. They don't know that they're signing up for this type of information.
But isn't that what marketing's been doing for 50 years? I mean, marketing, whether it was done with Facebook or it was done on a television set or in a magazine or a newspaper, wasn't that always what they were doing, convincing you of things that appealed to you with people that looked like you for products that you really didn't need? I'm not defending it. But it really is just, it's the same marketing stuff we've been seeing since forever.
It is marketing, and so you could also, it's the economics, we talk about social engineering, it's the economics of behavior. People call it nudge economics now. And so there's a lot of study. I guess I should go back a little bit. My background was in actually some of this stuff, and I did study, for example, in conflict, how you would win the hearts and minds of people, dropping leaflets, or I even wrote a blog post once about how a very small group of invaders into Ethiopia were able to overcome massive odds by using some psychological methods. Ord Wingate is probably one of the seminal studies in this area, as he was able to use just a few thousand Sudanese soldiers to defeat hundreds of thousands of Italians. So it's not just marketing, it's really manipulating others. But on the topic of marketing, I think it's interesting to look at, I did a presentation recently where I exposed basically Ronald Reagan, for example, for lowering the level of controls we had around marketing. So we pushed, for example, marketing to children, and even below the level of what the providers themselves considered safe controls. He removed safety in a way that, if we're in a cloud context, you'd say even the cloud providers are being told by the Reagan administration to remove malware protection because they think it's unnecessary and the market will solve for itself. And so that transition was just one of several things that happened in the United States that actually made things much worse for us in terms of information dissemination. The Reagan administration debacle was followed up by the Gingrich moves under the Clinton administration, which further deregulated essentially how you would disseminate that information. So now we have much larger entities providing information with much less regulation. And so, as we know, if we take off controls when there's known harm, then it's not really just about marketing per se, but it's about whether you recognize that there's harm that as an outcome that's very highly likely or probable, and restricting that type of advertising. So we do that. We restrict certain types of advertising, but we've done a lot less of it since the Reagan administration.
And isn't that one of the big naiveties, though? I mean, the big naivety always to me was that the assumption in this free market thing is that companies do what's best for the consumers, but the reality is companies do what's best for the companies. So when we deregulate them and they say, well, we could sell cigarettes to children, and you go, well, that's I guess they'll do what's right, and people will turn away from the company, but they don't. They like those profits to come rolling in. So I agree with you.
And to what you're saying about how the companies are going to do what's best for themselves, is there any better example than political advertising? They're certainly not going to do what's best for the people. They're going to do what's best for themselves.
And they've been lying a lot lately and just making things up and telling you whatever you wanted to hear to get you to vote. And that's become the standard in marketing. All that stuff is just like, the only thing that matters is getting them to vote. It doesn't matter how you do it. It's just you got to get them to go pull that lever. It doesn't matter what we tell them or how we tell them or whether it's true. Just you got to get them to do it. And that is the danger in like big data and things like that. Because again, that assumption that the developers are not malevolent, that the marketers are not malevolent, and that the company is going to do what's best for all of society, when in reality they're going to do what's best for the bottom line.
Dovie, is regulation one of the better ways to solve the problem of violations of people's privacy?
It certainly is, and regulation comes in lots of different forms. I think people overemphasize government. Government regulation, in my sense, from all the work I've ever done, has been that it's like the last. When government gets involved, it's because people have bound together and they've basically formed a government in order to say, look, we've tried every other possible method, so you've really screwed it up so much, now we're going to have to use the last vestige of control we have. There's other regulation that comes earlier, which industry self-regulates, organizations self-regulate, even groups, whatever size, regulate. So there's shaming, there's, all sorts of penalties that people put on one another when they think people shouldn't do. Those are all regulation methods. So GDPR is a good example of this. I mean, I feel like a human right to privacy makes sense. And so the question is, what authority is going to decide what privacy means, and then who's going to enforce it? And so regulation is, by nature, it's just how humans operate. Probably one of the better ways to say, this is what we mean, and this is how you're going to have to comply. And then it gets more and more technical as you move on, because people become more and more familiar from attempting. Maybe a better way of saying that is we innovate around controls and we make better security decisions when we're forced to understand a standard that we should adhere to. If we want to go to the moon, we have to build rockets, but if no one says go to the moon, we just don't bother.
Dovie, how do we balance the having more privacy and allowing it to lead us to where those that are going to do bad things are able to hide behind that privacy. And I think certainly we've seen that with Tor and blockchain technologies. And sure, they do allow for some kind of privacy, but they're also being used to fuel some of the underground economy. How do we balance that when we have these regulations?
That's one of the hardest problems. I mean, really, I'd like to present this as the battle of knowledge versus privacy. And I think when you frame it that way, you say, if I could solve cancer, would you give me your information? And a lot of groups, China and India in particular, would say yes. Yeah. If you have a social good, then they tend to sacrifice their privacy. That doesn't actually work as well in the United States and Sweden and some other countries. So these have been studies that Microsoft actually did some really interesting stuff, and they testified in front of the US government about these research results. So in the US and Sweden, which are on the opposite end of the spectrum, it's more like you have to say, I'm not going to gain knowledge that I can use to save the world, but I can give you a chocolate bar. Would you give me your privacy? And then people say, yeah. If I get something personal, which may be a secret, maybe knowledge, like if I tell you something about a famous celebrity, would you give me your privacy? And people say, oh, sure. Yeah, I'll do that. So yeah, with competing knowledge versus privacy, then we basically have a spectrum that I have a slide that I try to show people that's basically 5 degrees in which we move up with less and less privacy towards knowledge until we get to about level 4. And then there's this trough of disillusionment that we fall into. And by the time we try to get to level 5, where we have sort of perfect knowledge and no privacy, people react in such a strong way, we start over at level 1, which is basically binary. Things are either good or bad. And that's a terrible level to operate at. It's much better to mature to where we can think this is getting better, or these are kinder, better things. So whenever somebody says, like, this isn't working perfectly, we need to do a reset, they're basically taking us on a 5-step level. They might be at level 2 or 3 and going to 1, not even trying to get to level 4.
Do you think, though, that people are just now learning, though? I mean, that it's always an evolutionary process. So, yeah, I agree with you. But maybe as people don't really understand what they're being asked to give up, or that they're even giving up anything at all. They just want the chocolate bar. They just want the celebrity photo. So maybe over time, as they learn, they will become more discerning about what components they're willing to sacrifice and not sacrifice, and when to sacrifice and when not to sacrifice.
Well, this is why it's like it really gets into philosophy. David Hume, one of my favorite philosophers of all time, he sort of put it as you're never going to open a door if you have to figure out how every doorknob works. You're going to sort of like take for granted that you've opened a few before, and you're going to turn it or you're going to push it. And so a lot of this is about shortcuts. A lot of it is about people wanting to go on with their lives. And so they don't actually want lots of knowledge, and they don't want to get lots of things, but they want things they like, and they want to not have to know things that other people tell them are true. They'll just go ahead and go with it because it saves them a lot of time. So efficiencies are where we get into trouble. And I found this more and more and this is where security really has to play a part. A lot of companies that are promising you machine learning, AI, all sorts of insights, are using shortcuts like you wouldn't believe. There are all sorts of cheats, which should be familiar to anyone who's worked in security. Like when you try to go in and say, like, show me your patch level, show me your controls, show me the roles that you've created. People do as little as possible to get away with it. And so, for example, when the Tesla was driving down the road, it lacked a lot of knowledge. And it used a bunch of cheats, and that got it in trouble, and it killed its driver. And the Uber is the same thing. They removed a lot of the systems that would have given it better knowledge because they thought it would get them faster to market, and also allow them to operate safely without knowledge. So they weren't trying to protect privacy in that sense. They're actually going for performance gains, but it's sort of the same thing, right? You have a value, and you think that less knowledge is okay.
Jack or Jason on the lines via Skype, did you have questions, certainly privacy related, for Dovie?
I think
I did not.
Digging in pretty well. It is a trade-off, and the convenience factor is a challenge. I mean, the first big revelation I had with internal struggle was years ago. I remember being in San Francisco and came back from a conference. I'm in my hotel room with my new Android phone, and I looked at it, and the phone just had one of those messages that comes up on the home screen to tell you stuff, and it told me one of my favorite artists was playing at a club nearby. Junior Brown was playing at Yoshi's, but I hadn't searched for Junior Brown on that phone, but it was a Google device, so it had my search history, and it was a phone, so it knew where I was. And so I remember just picking the phone up. It buzzed. I looked at it. I picked the phone up. I threw it across the hotel room, cursed at Google, walked over, picked it up, and punched the button, and called Yoshi's and bought a ticket and walked over and saw the show. And I think that story says a lot about the challenges, opportunities, and trade-offs we make. In the end, I was still annoyed and went to see a great show I would have missed otherwise, even though I was less than a mile from where Junior Brown was playing.
Well, and I think in some research that I've been doing lately, Davi, I think that what Jack was referencing and what you were referencing earlier was that if you give something to someone, they're willing to give you their information, and it's somewhat of an exchange. And I think there's no better example as Black Hat is upon us, and RSA was earlier this year. When people visit the booths of security vendors, they're like, oh, I want one of those tchotchkes or swag things. And they're like, oh, I need to scan your badge first. And later on, the annoyance factor comes like when you might get an email from them or a phone call from their sales team. And I think that's, gone a little sideways because we're kind of annoyed by that, right? It's not very targeted. You weren't there necessarily to learn about that company. You were there just to get a piece of swag. And I think that's bad for both parties, Davi. So how do we make this right for both parties, for those of us that actually are interested in purchasing things?
Well, that's why GDPR is interesting, because when they say it's a human right to privacy, they put control back in the hands of the person whose data it is. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the primary issues we have is like Facebook, a perfect example of this. People are giving away so much because they think they might be getting something out of it. But what they don't realize is how much they're giving away. It's like negotiating with the devil. You're basically saying, I'm going to go down to the crossroads and I want to learn how to play, and they're going to take everything away from you, and you're going to have like no control left. They're literally going to change your future, change your decisions. You're essentially going into a cult-like relationship where you're following a leader who's making you make decisions that may even be suicidal. So the idea that you have a right to privacy puts all that control back in your hands, where you say, okay, I want to check out. I want to get out of this cult. I want to leave the following, stop drinking the Kool-Aid, and they give you the ability to erase, your presence on that platform. So regulation is very powerful in the sense that it can say you have a right to leave the cult of Facebook. So, and I think when people see it that way, they'll begin to realize that, forsaking that religious leader, Zuckerberg, who's trying to keep them always eyeballs on, as much as he can. That's the change I'd like to see. That's where I'd like to see. I mean, I can talk about it in terms of Uber and Tesla as well, but I think Facebook is the most compelling example of an evil organization where security professionals were complicit in doing harm to people.
We also started talking about the ethics of computing, and I like that Doug's here because I don't know if you have a course in your university program for ethics for computer science.
It's very brief. It just says don't do it.
Right. But when we talk about these privacy things, there are those of us out there that are applying security and maybe even developing some of these systems. When does ethics come into play, and how do we teach that effectively in the schools? Because I feel like we're dropping the ball, as you've already evidenced in some of your comments already.
Well, it's interesting. It's different in different places. So I feel like some people treat computer science as an engineering discipline, and I found certain countries where you're not allowed to become an engineer, chemical, mechanical, otherwise, unless you go through an ethics course. You can't build a bridge that will fall down. But it's not always that way. People look at software in particular as just something that you release, and a market will determine whether it's safe or not. And in the United States, the story is cryptographers will only sign an ethics statement 50% of the time, like an intent to do no harm. And that's shocking when you think about what cryptography is really supposed to do. It's supposed to make things safer. And if people aren't signing an ethics form, then where's their foundation? And the reason they don't sign it, apparently, is because they say that they're not experts in this, which is troubling, because you don't have to become an expert in ethics to sort of have a foundation that tells you, right, wrong isn't something that requires a lifetime of study. It's something that comes a little more easily. So I teach ethics in a computer science graduate course. I have done for about 5 years, precisely for this reason. I just got involved and decided to find out why it was so hard or what's the problem. And I teach it privately too, in corporations, organizations around the world, all the time. And there's always one person, no matter where I teach or who I am teaching with, there's always one person in the class that says, what if I was God though? What if I had absolute perfect knowledge? Would that be okay? Then I could just decide whatever I want and I wouldn't have to listen to others. And it's bizarre to me. I don't think this is a problem that's going to be easy to solve ever, but heartening part of this is the rest of the class turns on them and they say, no, you can't be perfect. Like at some point you'll be wrong, and you have to recognize that if you make a mistake, there has to be corrective action.
We have an ethics course, and I always go back and forth in this, so I have a great opportunity for me to ask you my question, which is, do you think you can teach ethics to people? I mean, do people become ethical because they took a course, or do unethical people take the course, sign a form and saying, yes, now I'm ethical, and yes, I will never commit an ethics breach because they're unethical to start with? I have some problems with that. I mean, I think the courses are valuable, but when I look at them, they're almost like philosophy courses. It's about discussing ethics rather than about like, here's what you need to do. So it's a great chance for me to ask you that question.
Oh yeah, I definitely think you can teach people ethics, and I definitely think you can turn people on certain issues. I've been a competitive debater for a long, long time, and I know when I'm losing an argument, when I'm winning an argument, and it's really hard sometimes in computer science courses because I feel like I'm losing these arguments with people who I'm not going to get them to turn the corner. But I teach in Austria, for example, and I've had some students who they go after me because they like to fight, and they will say, you're from the United States, you're NSA. And I just feel like they don't have a good ethical foundation they have a lot of good arguments, but they don't have a good ethical foundation. And by the end of the class, it's about 16 hours, they actually thank me. They say, I think of things differently now. And maybe to put it in a better perspective, I work with a lot of developers now where I build threat models. And it's sort of like asking, can you teach someone security? Can you teach someone to think about threats? Can you teach someone to think about harm, impact, right? Can you decompose an application? Can you walk through how it works, where the assets are, and look for things that could get hurt if you don't protect against that? You absolutely can teach these concepts, whether it be what an asset is, what value is, what a control is, right? Vulnerabilities, impact. So yeah, I've had great success. But like I say, there's always one person I just can't get through to, and they just say, I think I might have the accuracy of God, so I don't want anyone else telling me what's right and wrong.
Mm-hmm. What, narcissists in computer science? Say it isn't so.
Right?
It happens.
So, Dovie, what are some of your techniques for allowing people, and I think it's teaching people ethics, is you have to allow them to come to more ethical conclusions on their own. So what are some of your techniques to essentially social engineer them into coming to some of those conclusions and getting them to think differently?
Well, I've had to modify how I've done this over the years. I mean, initially I tried a very technical approach where I would just use systems themselves and show people what's good and bad and use an example. That didn't seem to be very successful because people just saw it as more programming, essentially. So then I switched to an entirely philosophical approach where I just took them through the history of ethics, which I enjoyed greatly because I got to talk about, from Aristotle to Wollstonecraft, and sort of everybody in between, or Nietzsche, what they were talking about. And that flopped completely because people said, this is philosophy, we hate it. So then I blended the two in the next 3 years, and I basically took people through examples of technology that failed, and then I mapped it to ancient ethical principles. So ethical models, essentially, of what Hume was talking about, as I mentioned before. Wollstonecraft is a good example. She was very she was very, in the 1700s, in the 1780s, she was writing about how slavery should end and how women should have rights. And she had just built such a good ethical model for how you can figure out what to do in society. And I find most people have never heard of her. They've heard of other people at that time, like Kant, but not her. And same with Hume, actually. I found a lot of people have heard of Rousseau, but not Hume. So it's interesting to me also that some of the okay philosophers get a lot of airtime, but some of the lesser known ones don't. So for example, when I just gave a presentation to a huge global organization, 300 plus people, maybe even 500 on the call in the presentation. And I start talking about Wollstonecraft, and people are like, who? And so that sort of opens people's minds because it's new knowledge, it's things they haven't heard about, they don't know what this person is or what they're saying. And then I map it to, okay, and this is why the Tesla car killed the driver, actively made a decision to do the worst possible thing and murder the person in the car, which is a different way of presenting a reality than what they'd heard. And so I think that's kind of the methods I use, sort of to use new knowledge and to map it to actual real world events and show people how code itself, how you write the code, how you make the products, how you release the code, responsibility down the road, how that plays out. But even so, I found people that will disagree with me, and I map out how harm is done, and they say so, and I say, but we've built this framework that says harm shouldn't be done. They're like, yeah, but I don't care. And so, as I said, every so often I feel like I can't get through, but that's the goal, is to get through to everybody else who is ready to listen, and maybe that other person will come back later.
Dovie, are you presenting anywhere else this year?
I am. I think I just got asked to present. I'll be at Black Hat for a little panel, which I usually don't do presentations at Black Hat anymore. Not my vibe. But where else? I'll be in Europe for MongoDB World. That's a good presentation.
There you go. Now, are you speaking at MongoDB World?
I am. Yep. I'll probably be speaking about privacy rights and big data, as a matter of fact. Hot topic.
Awesome. That's really cool. So, Dovie, are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Yes. Ready.
All right. Question 1, 3 words to describe yourself.
Wow, these are hard questions.
These are easy. There's no right or wrong answer.
Curious. Now that I'm looking at the Skype thing, hairy. Guess I forgot to shave this morning.
You and
tenacious.
me both.
Tenacious. People say that about me all the time. Tenacious.
If you were to write a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Man, these are hard. What would the title be? For some reason, rain comes to mind.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Don't say hair.
No, I was going to say sunflowers.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
I have no idea what that means.
It's popular in Europe.
Yeah.
You'll see.
I try to avoid going first.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Oh my God, I don't know any celebrities.
They can be philosophers.
Yes, there you go.
I mean, Wollstonecraft, unbelievable philosopher. Absolutely top choice for a parent. I have to choose 2 parents?
Yeah, and the gender does not matter either.
We're open-minded.
We don't judge.
No.
Well, I talk about Hume so much.
Inanimate objects are okay.
Sure.
Oh, I know. Hammarskjöld.
Hammarskjöld. We're going to have to go Google search these now.
UN Secretary General.
People named Dog. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just love to talk to him. I mean, I don't know. It's just the opportunity to have that sort of person to be able to talk to would be amazing.
I just like to talk to somebody named Hammarskjöld.
Yeah, exactly. Dovie, that's awesome. Thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly. It was awesome having you on the show.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
And with that, we will take a short break, come back, and bring up our next interview. Stay tuned.